Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. So good to be back with V3 Conservatory Poet Wendy Kieffer. Wendy, thanks for making time like this. I was thinking about it and I got really excited about today's episode. I was thinking about this, and I used to have to introduce you formally, and we would talk about who you are, why poetry, why a poet. And now we just get to sit down and do poetry. Does it feel like that, kind of more natural each time we do it?
Yes, definitely. Feels great.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's the case for poetry. It seems like even when we started, there was like sparkles happening around the world where people were resonating with poetry. Poetry seemed to be picking up. I mean, you think back to the State of the Union address, and poetry really front and center after a long winter without it, and it started to be spring and pop up everywhere. Even since we've started, it feels like that's growing. Is that just in my head, or do you feel like that? Is there any data that you see to support that?
Right. My data is probably subjective at this point, but yes, I was saying the other day, in my feed, whether that's whatever social media channels, I've been seeing Helena Bonham Carter reading poetry, just her up close in her easy chair with a book of poems reading poetry. I've seen Judi Dench, and they're just kind of coming a lot more frequently, and I'm sharing them, and people are sharing them with me and saying, putting my name and tagging me in it. And I think it's exciting because some of the mediums that we have now are perfect for oration and for hearing poetry, which is something I think gives poetry that new life, where
Yeah,
before it's like I have to study the cold, hard white page, and now
sure.
we have all these multiple mediums to enjoy it. We're doing it at chapel, which is wonderful and worshipful. So yeah, I am seeing it. I am seeing it a lot more frequently.
Yeah. I think you're right about that, that it requires the mediums that allow for you to hear and to
Mm-hmm.
feel and to
Yeah.
see, and all that brings it alive in a way that maybe we didn't have. I certainly didn't have that growing up. It was in a page, on a
Yeah.
page, if you were doing it alone or in a classroom,
Yeah.
but that was where you would find poetry.
Right.
I think the other thing that's interesting, there's a lot of buzz about this Richard Dawkins article that's circulating. Richard Dawkins, this famous intellectual who's wrestled with faith and atheism and what does he believe, what does he not
Mm-hmm.
believe, and just cool to hear him warming to the idea, even that like we've lost something.
Right.
And we've been saying it forever, that it's this disenchanted moment. Lewis saying the way back, thinking abolition of man, is irrigate the desert. And I
Mm.
think that's what's happening too, is the ground itself of our heart, of our
Mm.
institutions, of our families is like just yearning
Right.
for something fresh to
Right.
permeate it.
Yeah.
And
It's
poetry does.
dry and thirsty for
Yeah.
beauty and for meaning and for purpose. Yeah. And you're right. There is something special about that cultural moment when somebody like Dawkins can say, wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah.
What we had is precious.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we're longing, like you said, for something beyond, something transcendent. That longing is to the dry bones level where we're like, I thirst,
Yeah.
literally. And there's not a lot of agreement yet about like what are we thirsting for, but there is
Right.
agreement that we're thirsty. And that's a wonderful, wonderful place to start, especially
True.
when you've got this spring of something so fresh and life-giving like you have. So that's why
Yeah.
we're so glad to talk to you. And we're excited because we started this saying we don't want to just do this in podcast form. The big dream of V3 is that we want to participate at an institutional level and to see a conservatory exist
Yeah.
that is set apart for the purpose of nurturing art and transcendent art that is all art, points beyond itself, but being very, very intentional about nurturing and supporting art that is doing that work. So long term, we want to have a conservatory. In that conservatory, we want to have poets and artists on staff. That's the big dream, so that we can publish. And we don't have the conservatory yet, but we've taken a step toward publishing. You're working on our first poetry book.
Yep.
And we've got a date now set. Tell us about the book that you're working on, and just kind of how it's coming together, what you're experiencing as you curate this really special first edition of a poetry book.
Yeah, it's been really great working on this piece because as we've said that we're focusing on the vision up, vision in, vision out, And I think I said this last time, that you really realize that most poems have one or overlap those vantage points. There's really no other point to look through. I'm either looking from me out here, I'm looking up, asking why, or I'm looking in and really processing the pains and the emotions of what it means to be human. And so some of these poems were brought in from a while ago. Some of them are all new. I've written in this year, and they're all just simmering together in this collection quite beautifully. You called it the bouquet. It's like a big flower and some little ones, and then this one goes here. And somehow I'm looking at it as a whole, and I'm nodding, saying, yes, this does cohere and really beautifully make something for a first offering that I think is going to be really good.
Yeah. It's exciting. I'm fortunate enough to get to see all of the working drafts coming together, and I read it from start to finish, the poems that you've curated, and they're original. These are all your poems. This is your poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it spans multiple genres, and that's the funny part about the bouquet, is that I realize some of it sounds like romantic poetry, some of it sounds like contemporary poetry, some of it is long opus kind of, some of it's short. So it all just is in the bouquet together.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait.
It's fun.
This is so fun because we get to do it with all of you who are the lab audience in this V3 community that expands really across the country and around the world. People who are yearning, like we are, thirsting for that life and beauty of the gospel to spring up. And so this is just one piece. August 22nd is the date that we've set. So we're going to take this show back to where it started, Buddy Brew on Kennedy. And we're going to be at the Kennedy location that night on the 22nd. And we're going to do the whole thing, a book signing. You're going to be there to read poetry, to embody it. And I can't wait. When you think about a night like that, what part of that is most exciting? I'm an event person, so I just like to see it all happen, right? Like people coming in, guests coming in. Buddy Brew's amazing, and it's warm. Yes. And then to see poetry enchant the place. What is it for you?
Well, I think you just said it, because when we went to the Mary Frances unveiling, I thought if I went into a room and I saw her painting and I sat with it for a while, I would be moved and I would have thoughts and there'd be a stirring. But it's different to have this beautiful place lit up in this amber glow lighting, and everyone's assembled and we're all there and we're hushed and we're sitting down, and then it unveils, and then there's a podcast we can really go deeper with it, and we've all shared it together live. I mean, in this day and age, that's a feat. So there's something about sharing in the art live together that I think is so beautiful and powerful.
I agree. And thanks for saying that. Dave Grohl, Foo Fighters, another Gen X guy, he wrote an article one time about live music and rock music, and he was lamenting the reality that really Gen X is the last analog generation. There was there was something that took place, and he was just looking back like an old person going, those rock shows where you were live, you only saw it that night. Like it never happened again.
Right.
Like whatever happened in that moment was the thing. To participate in that, there's something human. And he couldn't have been speaking more truth. I think that's part of when we've said an embodied faith. We're not meant to have this disembodied, abstracted thing. It is this incarnational thing, and it's participatory. And that's where we taste and see something that we go, what is... Right. Who made that?
Right.
So,
And when our senses are all engaged, the more senses that can be engaged, which they are when things are live, we're hearing, we're seeing, we're smelling, we're having a whole sensational experience. I mean, even me, I saw Dune 2, and I saw it in a Dolby sound theater, which I've never done. Yeah. And just to have the bass rumbling behind me through the whole thing, I was like, okay, that took the movie to another level, because I had the senses of sound and I could feel it in my bones. So there's something about just having all of the senses engaged that is really special.
It's good. Put it on your calendar. August 22nd is the poetry book release for this poem, or these poems. You'll hear them live. You'll get to feel it and be in the room and be as a community. So even if you listen from somewhere else, it's very hot in Florida, but I'd still say come be in the room in person. So So fun. We get to do it. And we get to do a part of that today. That's the cadence for this, is just to create space to hear these poems and let them have an impact, let them move us. So tell us a little bit about the poem you selected for today and the poet, and then I'll pull on that thread a little bit before we hear it.
Just to peel back the curtain a little bit, we had I had some poems that we had selected weeks ago, and I sent them to you, and they were about spring, and they were glorious, and they were luminous and lyrical, and it seemed fitting to head into the holy days and just spring. And then some time went by, and I feel like the team, when we meet and we discuss the books and we meet for prayer and our team meetings, these themes kept coming up about these moments of really beholding the blackberry and tasting the fruit and looking at the texture and just being very mindful of this miracle called the blackberry. And then another team member sent that quick poem about a pineapple, and all of a sudden this poem came to mind and just sort of pushed its way to the surface, and I sent it to you, and you were like, that's great. So this is called Meditation on a Grapefruit. This is a poem by Craig Arnold, and I thought it was fitting that we took that poem to Europa last month, and it really panned out. We went all the way into space. We went all the way into the human experience. She took us really far into what it means to be human in kind of a meta general sense. And this poem was so up close and so specific and just tied into those meditations we've been experiencing as a team of like, what is up close, what's in our hand, and how glorious is that thing that might be just so ordinary. So I feel like he does a really good job with this poem of taking our thoughts and our intention and our mind into the present moment of something ordinary and yet teeming with the extraordinary. Craig Arnold, in discovering him, I discovered him inside of another book. And so the poet who was curating and writing this other book is also wonderful. But Craig Arnold had a very short, it's kind of I think 2 books, because he died rather mysteriously and rather young in 2009, hiking in the mountains of Japan. He never saw him again. So his work that he left is so profound. And it's been really great because I can find him reading his own poems. I can hear him reading them. And it's powerful to hear them out loud. So I've really enjoyed getting to know Craig Arnold and his work, even though it's brief because his time here was cut short. It's still very profound. Yeah.
I love that about reading too. I'm always championing reading, but I heard Jerry Root say this, that he describes Lewis like this. He said he opened more than wardrobe doors, and Jerry Root says it really beautifully, but it's so true. And that whoever we read, often we will find a door to someone else, and they'll introduce us to someone else. And pretty soon our life is so rich in this way that would have never been possible had we not just opened that book and followed those threads. So I love that that's how this came about. And I also love it coming off of Easter. I think all of us, anytime there's a holiday, but particularly Easter, we do have that sense of the story is so big and so universal in its scope and cosmic in its scale. And it feels very much like that. It's like the Transfiguration. It's a very mountaintop moment. And then Monday, right? Then you're back in the valley of the ordinary.
Right.
And you're in the light on this side of an Easter morning reality. So there is a new creation sense, and we are changed.
Right.
But it sometimes is hard to remember that in the ordinary. And I loved that. That's, as I tracked through this and kind of preparing for this conversation, I loved how specific. And going back, like you said, to the blackberry, there is something. And I hope that that's what this conversation does, is you hear this poem, is that on the other side of this magnificent cosmic impact of the resurrection, we don't ever forget that there is a right now enjoyment of God, an enjoyment of the life and beauty of the gospel that does make God smile, to go to one of our team members' quotes. So how about you want to dive in?
That sounds great.
Let's do it. Meditation on a Grapefruit.
Meditation on a Grapefruit by Craig Arnold. To wake when all is possible, before the agitations of the day have gripped you. To come into the kitchen and peel a little basketball for breakfast. To tear the husk like cotton padding a cloud of oil, misting out of its pinprick pores, clean and sharp as pepper. To ease each pale pink section out of its case so carefully without breaking a single pearly cell. To slide each piece into a cold blue china bowl, the juice pooling until the whole fruit is divided from its skin, and only then to eat. So sweet a discipline, precisely pointless, a devout involvement of the hands and senses, a pause, a little emptiness. Each year harder to live within, each year harder to live without.
Mm.
To wake when all is possible, before the agitations of the day. So I love the place of this poem, the kitchen. I think the kitchen is a special setting, that there's holy things that happen in the kitchen. That is, the kitchen is the hearth of the home. It's the life of the household, the kitchen. And you're in there and it's quiet and you've awakened and all is possible. This is before the traffic. This is before the work, the mundane workload that might be awaiting you. This is before.
I think this is, I go back to Dana Gioia, Poetry is Enchantment. He quotes Robert Frost and says, poetry has a way of helping us remember what it would impoverish us to forget.
Yeah.
And that's when you talk about place. Again, just I'm so glad you're with us in this podcast, and we're the invitation to just recognize that we have a place.
That's right.
And that you are there and that you're in a place. We can breeze right past that and let the agitations of the day grip us.
Right.
And so with 6 words in, there's a caution against that and a taking for granted. And that poetry has a way of helping us remember what it would impoverish us to forget.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And it, we enter in, this is Robert Frost also, we enter in through delight and we end with wisdom. This is a delightful thing to read and a delightful thing to ponder, but we become wiser by the end, you know.
Part of that delight is the little basketball for breakfast.
I know.
Like, what? I love it.
I know. I love his imagination. And so, and he does have a really beautiful way with the verbs. So when he says toward the end, an involvement of the hands and senses, he leads us there through peel, tear, ease, slide. There's this motion that's happening all the time. If we're really living in an embodied way, we're conscious of our hands, our eyes, our feet, that sensation of our bodies moving through space, I think is also something that we're recovering in this generation. There's a lot of focus on the body and soul and mind being unified and both given all of them given their proper place. And so he does this with peel, tear, ease, slide. And, just even the cloud of oil misting out of its pinprick pores. I can see that. Clean, sharp as pepper. And so now he has pepper and I can taste something. So I'm feeling it with peel and tear. I'm tasting it with pepper and then later down sweet. And I'm seeing it with pale pink, cold blue. So all of the senses are being engaged, which is that's my favorite kind of poetry, where it feels like I'm seeing, I'm feeling, I'm tasting. I think some people might call this mindfulness poetry, which I think is, it is, but it's more than that too, is just to have that consciousness as we move through something as ordinary as preparing a grapefruit for breakfast. Yeah.
I think even as you're reading all of those verbs and thinking about the body, I was just thinking if we were invited to go to MIT on the day that they unveiled a robot that could elegantly peel a grapefruit, we would be stunned if we saw that level of precision coming from a mechanized thing. I don't think that we're anywhere close to that kind of dexterity to grab a grapefruit and delicately pull it back so that just that mist appears out of that one clean pore, right?
Yeah.
Like we would be marveling at that kind of ingenuity to create that.
Yes.
And every single person who can walk downstairs and peel a grapefruit is light years ahead of that, and the ability to touch it.
Yeah.
And to feel the cool, to taste it, to have all that sensory experience. When you talk about fearfully and wonderfully made, and just the beauty of remembering who we were created to be.
That's right.
That's the invitation. It's extraordinary out of like 5 lines that you're faced with something that you could easily pass right by, but in a different venue, you'd be stunned at that.
Right. Now, let's have that robot also be curious about what he's doing and then write a poem about it and then
reflect on it, see the meaning. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Maybe see his maker. So I think there's a whole apologetics. There's got to be a whole movement that's burgeoning with the advent of AI because we made something in our image.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's modeled after the human brain because it's made in our image.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking, well, take that back the other direction for us. We are made in his image. We are made in God's image. And it's like, of course, we're made to do that, to create in our image because he did. It's like,
yeah, it's right there on the surface. And just thinking about the image and likeness thing, the great fear is, what if this thing that we've made in our image to be good decides to go in an opposite direction?
Yes.
How heartbreaking.
That's right. That's right. And it could go either way. Yeah. So we have, like you said, this just recognition that even being human and occupying a space and preparing something that, I mean, you could even talk about the grapefruit. The life cycle of a grapefruit would be a whole other poem. Just this basketball of juice and pepper and clean, sharp flavors that we get to engage with for breakfast in this beautiful blue bowl really takes us into this present and asks us to be mindfully grateful and gracious about each moment, every moment holy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have the juice pooling, and then to eat so sweet a discipline, precisely pointless.
Yeah.
I mean, you could just like cut it and eat it. You don't need to do all this extra peeling and then you put it in the bowl. And I mean, you could do a paper plate. You could just scoop it out in kind of a frenzy in the car on your way to somewhere. I mean, you could. And he's saying, we're doing this whole thing. Is it pointless? A devout involvement of the hands and senses. And then my very favorite is the ending. A pause, a little emptiness. And then these last 2 lines, each year harder to live within, each year harder to live without. I'll tell you something about these last 2 lines. Because they are missing some of the transition words that would qualify what he's talking about, it leaves it open to interpret it. And because of that, it has actually been circling in my mind for the last couple of days. Well, it could mean this. Well, what if it means this? Oh, but then it could mean this. And I thought, wow, by providing me with just enough, but not too much, I've had to keep tasting the lines and pulling out different flavors of what they might mean.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's perfect for a poem based on some kind of succession of steps and engagement with fruit and tasting. I'm having to really take these last 2 lines and say, okay, well, now that they've stirred in me, because it wasn't quite obvious, it had a little mystery to it, I've gone way deeper into it than I would have gone if he had hit me on the head with it. So
yeah, it feels like that. You think about like a camera footage or something inviting you to focus closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to like an antique doorknob.
Right.
And you get all the way to this like very, very, very precise blue china bowl with one pool of grapefruit juice.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like the doorknob turns and now you're back out into this wide expanse of going,
Right.
what is he saying? Wait, you
Right.
just brought me all the way to this
Yes.
precise point
Mm-hmm.
to drop me into this ocean. Like, that's
Right.
beautiful.
The ocean of a year. Wait, now we went from the grapefruit. Now it's a year. Hold on. Wait, where are we going?
Yeah.
And
What
yeah.
did it provoke in you? I mean, as you thought about
Yeah.
those last two lines,
Right.
again, he could be inviting us to see so many different things.
Yeah. So first thought was a pause, a little emptiness. And so that moment sometimes when you're aware of that human hungering and it just hits you where you might have that feeling of futility, that feeling, it's just, I have these moments, flashes where I go, gosh, just, it's all meaningless. Or, something where it's like you're aware of the emptiness, that hungering of being a human. And so when he says each year harder to live within, it's harder to live within the emptiness. It's harder to live without, which is the emptiness. Without what? What are we living without? In my view, without seeing God face to face, without a sinless world, without, there's a lot of things that we are without currently that yield that kind of empty feeling. And we can all say that's the human experience, that we all are aware of what I mean when he says emptiness, of what that means. So I saw that at first, just that human hungering is hard to live within. It's hard to live without certain things.
We're reading this book, The Wounds of Beauty, and Margarita's book. And I was just thinking that is the beauty, line after line after line of all these verbs and all this beautiful description that just delight.
Yeah.
And then that delight brings you to the recognition that we long for something, and that beauty provokes that longing.
Yeah.
And that was hard. That's what happened to me, because this was so delightful, and it's like, yes. And there's a photographer who is photographing Gaza right now, and just took a picture of a series of pictures of children in Gaza waiting for food and water. And those images are just hard to even get your mind around when you see pain like that and longing like that. And there's something within us that says to hold both things and go, the delight of grapefruit pooled in a cool blue china bowl. Yeah, that's a yes. That is yes. What does that provoke in us? Do we have to discard that because there's pain in the world? Or can we really take that bite and taste and see something so good and allow it to provoke a sense of emptiness and longing for something that's hard to live without, right? Maybe if that's how we engage, I don't know.
Right, no, and there's moments, I think, where Jesus meets us in that, like the woman at the well, and he says, this water, you'll thirst again. It's not just the grapefruit and the senses that you have here. There is a thirst for something so much more. There's that spring of eternal life that never runs dry. That's what you're really thirsting for. And I think no matter what situation we're in, whether it's this sort of banal, mundane day or a situation of great tragedy, that spiritual renewal, that deep well that doesn't run dry, I think that's what the thirst is really looking for. Yeah.
When it's interesting, as we're sitting here talking, and I'm thinking to everybody listening, okay, how does this impact my day-to-day? How does this transform my apartment? How does this transform my vocation? How does this transform my relationships or inform them and irrigate the desert that I'm in? And I think that the invitation that I saw was, again, the recognition that it's okay to experience both things and that's not going to go away, right? And I think sometimes I've struggled with that before. If I could get rid of all grapefruit and cold china and not think about that and only focus on the hard things and give myself to that would be the higher virtue.
Right.
And yet without the coming downstairs and peeling a basketball, would you have what you needed for the day? Right? Not just in physical sustenance, but the desire to see
Yeah.
something beautiful shared. I don't know.
And maybe the consciousness,
Yeah, there you go.
right? Like he's so conscious. There's a moment of just taking us into this extreme consciousness. So then when you go out into your day, whomever you encounter, whatever God is calling you to do, and it may be messy and dirty and difficult or really tragic and painful, like the people photographing. It'd be so hard for me to be the photographer. I would want to be the water bearer,
Yeah.
you know, it's
Yeah.
like the camera, like, and yet by photographing it, the world knows about it. Now we are more moved to help and support. And so they all work together, right? And there's something about the consciousness of taking us into this moment that then we can go out and yes, we just peeled a grapefruit this morning. We're aware a little bit of our emptiness. Now we move forward. We're able to meet someone else in their emptiness. We're able to be conscious of the juice pooling in their heart, you know, things like that. I think there's always a redemptive, you know, kind of effect of spending time with beauty and truth, especially poetry, but art in general, that it kind of tunes us to then be more fully human toward one another, more fully aware and just conscious.
I love the language of tuning, that it tunes us. Yeah. And that's what is happening live right now in the conversation. But as I've read over and over and over this poem, it does tune your life and your heart. And this, I want to hear you on this, a devout involvement of the hands.
Yeah.
A devout involvement in the hands. There's this liturgy, this practice of coming downstairs and retrieving this little basketball, and the deliberateness, all these different verbs that took us to the end, to the wisdom part that you were talking about. How are you trying to be more devoutly involved with your hands? Because I think we get to have these conversations about the poetry of a cold china bowl and a splash, but you have kids, you have work, you know, you have card issues, like all the things that everybody is facing.
Right.
Just as a person, as you're trying to embody a more and I would say a more honest human experience. Whatever we eat, whatever we drink, whatever we do to the glory of God. That's the electric beauty of that way of living is what we've said is life to the full. Jesus said, I came that you might have life to the full, that you would touch a grapefruit and that you would be stunned. That you can feel it, that you can see that mist appear and taste that pepper, that you wouldn't lose that sense of wonder. And yet it is hard. Kids, be like a child, they get it. Hard as we get into midlife and all the cares of the world and all the things. But I think the devout involvement of our hands helps pull us back to that world.
Agree.
How are you doing? What are some little ways that in the kitchen, you're finding help there?
I think space matters. I think texture matters. I think what we look at matters. I think what we surround ourselves with matters. I think that I've made a space that I feel like the senses are enlivened, at least in my home. I think that the more we engage with the little things like this, where we're kind of focusing in on our breathing, we might be feeling the soles of our feet. I have a poem I wrote about sensing the earth beneath my feet. You know, there's a lot of poems in the water when I'm really aware for an instant of gravity and where I am in time and space. And I think the more we can have that kind of space, curate that space around us, it is engaging and enlivening. The more we can be conscious in the moment of our breath. What am I constricted? Am I breathing? Where are my feet? I think then we offer ourselves, we offer this perspective to, whether it's your children or your coworkers, you're offering a perspective that's very much aware and in the moment and able to receive and to give depending on what is needed. Yeah, you're kind of you're responding to your environment. Your environment and your world is not just flying by you. There's a response. There's a taking in. There's an awareness. And then I think that tunes us better toward one another, toward connection, toward really feeling and seeing and responding.
Yeah. we talk about the creaturehood recalibration all the time. That
Yeah.
like the recovery of our sense that we are creatures and
Mm.
that we live in a world, that we are made and the world is made and there is a
Yeah.
creator, and that there's a vulnerability to that. There
Mhm.
is a responsibility to that. There's these different layers of our creaturehood
Yeah.
that are very easy to lose when we are not aware that we are standing on real ground,
Right.
right? And that we are not just passing by digital files, but that we're literally making breakfast for other humans.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it sounds whimsical. It sounds, you listen to a poetry podcast, and this is what I love. I get to hang out with poets and we
Yeah.
go, this is what we think about. But the hope is that there is a recovery because, again, St. Irenaeus, the glory of God is
Yeah.
man fully alive.
Yes.
Like, what is it that brings God the most glory today? Would it be that a human creature would have that moment with the outside skin of a grapefruit and look up for just a moment and go, wow,
You
right?
made this.
You made this.
Made this.
And then the recognition in all of those
Yeah.
different layers that is what it is to be most glorifying to God, is to be most human.
Yes.
And it feels to me like there's just a violent rip current pulling us digitally away from that experience.
True.
And so this invitation is like a
Mm.
protest in my mind. Like
I love that.
it's beautiful and it's elegant and it's all these things, but it's also saying like there is something absolutely vital, right? To
That's right.
recover.
That's right.
Each year harder to live within,
Mhm.
each year harder to live without. That
Yeah.
there, yeah.
And I think people can say that when you look at a sunset. You're at the beach, the sun is setting, and you say, "Ah, look at this painter who painted in these colors. Look at this God. The earth is charged with the grandeur of God." Hopkins. It's like you can easily get swept away in a vista like that. But to your point, when you're peeling the grapefruit, when you're doing something, just even that, with your fingers, with your hands, with your senses, you're engaging with God and saying, "You made this."
Yeah.
You made this mist, this cloud. You made this. I told you, I think a while back, that one of the prayers we say before eating is, "Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth the bread from the earth or the fruit from the vine." Or there's this moment of saying, you made this,
Yeah.
and then eating it.
Yeah.
It's just another way in the course of your day and the course of your life to engage with the great artist. And his creation, his art is all around you.
Yeah.
You can taste it.
I almost want to pause right there and just go, this is what Dawkins was realizing when he said, "I'm a cultural Christian." So he was saying, how do you live in a world that seemingly new generations feel so much entitlement, and we miss this beautiful weight of responsibility of gratitude? How is that possible? How did we get here?
Wow.
I go, well, if you delete the meaningful backdrop, and there is no table prayer that says, "Thank you, God, creator of this." If there's no recognition of that, that's how you get a whole culture that has no recognition and no deep sense of an embodied gratitude. That's what happens. And that's what, again, he's thirsty. He's thirsty.
Yeah.
And this poem is an invitation to recover something. But the power really comes from a conversation like this when it translates and it goes back to our tables, right? It goes back to our kitchen. So that's what I was so excited about.
Yeah.
Meditation on a grapefruit. We talk about it.
Yeah.
Who will hear it and tomorrow morning come downstairs and find their way to their kitchen?
Yes.
And put their hands on something.
Yes. And here's another thing too, the China bowl.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about this for a second, because I've recently redone my dishes. I bought these charger plates that are really pretty. I got new table runners so that my children know how to set the table, and it's the same pieces, and they bring it out when we're having a company or just a Friday night dinner together, and they know how to set the table. And I purposefully use nice dishes. And a friend of mine who's in Montessori, she's a Montessori teacher, they use real dishes for little children, for 2-year-olds. There's something about the feeling of the dish, even the breakable quality of it, that it's important. And if we break it, well, guess what? We have a little mini broom and dustpan to then feel the responsibility of cleaning it up. So we don't take that away. We don't
Yeah.
say paper plates are fine. See, we're kind of in a paper plate cultural moment. And nothing wrong with paper plates. I've used them. But I think that there is something you lose by saying pizza and paper plates, pizza and paper plates. When you set the table, when he decides to put this grapefruit in a china bowl, that there's something to recover there of saying it's worth the extra mess to take the extra 5 minutes of cleaning up after the dishes. It's worth it because what we're doing is holy. We can make it beautiful. We can enjoy things that are beautiful and breakable and require a little extra maybe maintenance because the moment is worth it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You couldn't be making a more essential point. What does it mean to be a human? Why am I alive? What is the purpose of life? And you go, okay, come on, Zach. The purpose of life is to put a grapefruit in a blue china bowl. And I go, no, but it is to be fully alive. Even our most orthodox, like worship and glorify God and enjoy him forever. That moment, there is a confession being made of who am I made to be? And if everything is efficiency and pragmatism to get back to work, oops, we just found ourselves back in Egypt in this total work culture that Joseph Pieper talks about and saying, what does it mean to be alive? If the function of my life is just to move through my day, accomplishing set tasks ahead of me, then I've lost what it is to be a human. What God actually made me for was to participate in something that is enchanted and beautiful and dimensional and relational. That's actually what it means to be alive.
Yeah.
And if we, because of efficiency and pragmatism for the sake of a total work culture, strip all of that away so that we can just rapidly throw our paper plates in the garbage and get back to work, we've lost something essential. And so you couldn't be underscoring it more powerfully. And I love that you're using chargers and washing dishes. It's so inefficient, right? That's why we did it. That's why we got a microwave and all these things. It's easier not to.
Right.
But you lose that little joy of a brother and a sister washing dishes and struggling through the resistance of not wanting to.
Yes.
Kyle Washa, who was on this podcast a while ago, talked about the reason that they have their college students work with horses is that they learn the actual reality of cause and effect. They learn that they're in relationship with other things that are dynamic and sometimes more powerful than them, and they have to calibrate against that and recalibrate. If we take all of that away, do you think, well, who has time to have classes like this? You have one every time you clean up. If you set the table and then you force dishes and then you scrape plates and you have to be careful, you're shaping and forming people who understand responsibility and capacity. It's all happening.
So true.
But we have compartmentalized and fragmentized all of our existence. And then we sit around and scratch our head and go, man, if we just had time to have like a course on homemaking.
Yeah.
Like you live in a home. Just do it.
But, to be fair, a lot of us are struggling because we weren't shown.
I'm so glad you were pushing back.
What? No, I'm not. I'm totally agreeing with you, but we weren't shown.
No.
So if I'm a child of the 80s and 90s and it's like, there was moments when the table would be set and there'd be family dinners, but a lot of us were eating dinners in front of the TV. A lot of it, we weren't shown. Actually, Cammie and I are a part of that women's group that meets occasionally, and we have dinner, and the woman who puts on these dinners is old school. She said that her mother would keep her home on days where they were going to have company because she considered it part of her education. And they would go through step by step of how to fold the napkins, how to prepare, what to prepare ahead of time, how to set the table, all the different meals. And she learned how to do it, and now it's second nature. And you go to her house, and you feel like you're in this. It's holy, and she's so comfortable in that role. And I'm like, can you give us classes? We want classes. Yeah. So I'm trying to recover it, but it's a little bit of inventing the wheel. Yeah. But even just the table and the setting the table and the prayer and the having time together, I think I would encourage whoever's listening. Look at your table and say, what are the easy ways that I can make this more beautiful, more enjoyable to look at and to feel and to touch? And just start with simple things like that.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's think about just the kitchen.
Yeah.
And Kara Kennedy, who was on this podcast, wrote the book Supper. She talks about that. Just start with the table. And if you have nothing else in your home that you can start with, let's just start with the table. Start in the kitchen.
Yes.
And work for the recovery. Because I'm with you. We didn't have it. And none of us grew up. And again, it's not a push against our parents even.
No.
It was, we all got caught up in that rip current.
Yeah.
And now we're longing for something that is much more what we were made for and who we were made to be. And again, this is what people say, well, art is not essential. Beauty isn't essential. We should be talking about the gospel. And I would say we are talking about the gospel. There is why did God feel like it was worth pouring out his love to the end to purchase back these created beings? Because we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And the most orthodox thing we can do if we want to embody a no mere mortals theology, if we really believe that there are no mere mortals, then why wouldn't you take your kids out of school for a day to prepare for the not mere mortals that are coming over that night? Right? And this is where our theology turned into abstraction. We were like, no. We totally believe that there's no mere mortals, but we have to prepare everybody to work in a total work culture. And we lost something there about the richness and thickness and embodied incarnational nature of our theology that says, what if the people who are walking through our door at 4:30 this afternoon, what if we really saw their true nature, they are so wondrous that we might be tempted to worship, right? If that's reality, then we bake those things in real pans that we're going to scrape and wash. And that's, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All that out of a meditation on a grapefruit? What?
So deep.
It's good.
Yeah. And I remember when I lived in New York, I remember just going through, it was uncomfortable. The aisles in the grocery store were small. There was no place to park when we ended up with a car. It was just, I started having kids and it was uncomfortable. And it wasn't time to leave yet. God kept saying, not yet, not yet. I want you to stay. And I remember coming up, I remember thinking, just because it's harder doesn't make it worse. Just because it's easier doesn't make it better. And that kept coming to me over and over again. And I think I would say the same thing about dishes or time. Just because something takes more time doesn't mean that it's worse. Yeah. In fact, it might be an indicator that it's really worth it. Yeah. Yeah. Right?
I think so.
Just because paper plates are easy. What are you losing though?
Yeah.
What are you losing?
Yeah. What's the opportunity there? And I think even groceries, again, everything becomes so efficient that we don't even have to go get them. They'll bring them to us.
DoorDash.
Yes, beautiful. Love that. And taking your child who doesn't want to go with you to the grocery store to pick up some groceries.
Yeah.
Maybe you pass into a neighbor, like all these things.
Maybe you cook with the child. Yeah. And maybe your dinner is once a week because we are all busy.
Sure.
And I don't want to really dog paper plates too much, guys, because
we all use them.
We all use them.
There's paper plates here. We do it.
You could say one day a week.
Balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever. Start small.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Me
all
too.
right. Here's what I want to do. I want to encourage us to start with the kitchen, start with the table.
Yeah.
And just for fun, like, again, let poetry be a way of remembering what it would impoverish us to forget. And if that's what we can take away from this, like, yes, engage the poet. Yes, engage poetry. But pay attention because they're artists inviting us to something and to remember something that it would impoverish us to forget. And I think meditation on a grapefruit does it in a beautiful way. So thanks for picking this. This is great.
And I do have a poem to circle full back to the beginning. I do have a poem in the collection called The Table. And it really, and so many poets do. There's a lot of poems about tables because they are a very special place where very specific memories are being made.
Yeah.
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 So,
they're sacred.
Yeah.
All right. Well, take us out. Let's do it. I love the practice of letting us hear it again after we've kind of looked at it and walked around it. But let's just leave it with a meditation on a grapefruit.
Sounds good. Meditation on a Grapefruit by Craig Arnold. To wake when all is possible, before the agitations of the day have gripped you. To come to the kitchen and peel a little basketball for breakfast. To tear the husk like cotton padding, a cloud of oil misting out of its pinprick pores, clean and sharp as pepper. to ease each pale pink section out of its case so carefully without breaking a single pearly cell, to slide each piece into a cold blue china bowl, the juice pooling until the whole fruit is divided from its skin, and only then to eat. So sweet a discipline, precisely pointless, a devout involvement of the hands and senses, a pause, a little emptiness. Each year harder to live within, each year harder to live without.